Hi guys, this is Chanda from Chanda-Louise Consulting. We're a project management services company. We specialize in creating and updating workflows and automation. We currently serve entrepreneurs, business owners, founders, co-founders who have multiple businesses or run multiple businesses and have 5 or less employees. Hey, okay, so let's get into it. The PMP, you got one? Alright guys, so I am PMP certified. PMP stands for Project Management Professional. It's issued by the PMI Institute, so that's Project Management Institute, PMI. Alright, great. And essentially what they've done is, it's an industry recognized certification. So across the board in the project management world, this certification is recognized, and what it really comprises of is a set of governing rules that we say a project manager, typically who has experience and expertise in project management, should be following. So it creates a standard. All right, great. I'm not going to go too much into the certification in itself, but I really actually want to talk about more so the process in preparing for the certification. I get a lot of inquiries about it from different project management professionals who are actually thinking about or considering taking the exam, and I just want to do a quick video about how I prepped for it, and yeah, so let's get into it. So I actually started to prep for the exam seriously, I think 6 months prior to my taking the exam. Yeah, just about 6 months. So there's certain criteria that you need in order to even qualify to take the exam. If you have a bachelor's degree, I believe you need to have minimally at least 3 years of project management experience in any of the project management phases. And then you also need some project management educational course requirements. I'm not too sure how many hours those are offhand, but if you do check out the PMI website, you can get the exact criteria. Now, if you don't have a bachelor's degree, then I think on the other end, there's certain years of experience that you have, more than the 3 years, to compensate for that, and then more education hours that you need in order to qualify for the exam. So once you start to compile all that information and it looks all good, you then complete your application, and essentially you're doing an audit. So when I say an audit, I say you're tracking. So you're tracking all the education courses that you're taking, and then you're also tracking the hours that you're completing for the project management work. And then the way you're tracking that is you're actually categorizing it to say that this particular project, I worked in the initiation phase and I did 50 hours here. Or in this project, I was in the execution phase and I did 350 hours, etc. So you have like a spreadsheet or whatever tracking mechanism works best for you, and you track those hours that you complete, project management that you complete, those hours of the project management work that you complete, and then you also track your educational hours that you complete. In regards to the educational hours, what I did is I took courses provided by my company. So my company, typically a lot of companies have like a intranet, like company education system, right? So it's an internal company education system that they have, and typically they'll have different trainings that an employee can take. So they specifically had a track for project management courses that I could take. Some of them would be 30 minutes long, some of them would be an hour long. So I would just, within those 6 months, delegate some time out each week to take those courses to fulfill that requirement. Alternatively, you can also take a boot camp. So I did a boot camp as well. And typically the boot camp is about 36 to 40 hours, which fulfills that requirement as well if you have a bachelor's degree. So with that boot camp, I think I went in for about 4 days, and it was pretty intense. So it started like maybe 8 to 6 each day for those 4 days, and that is another way to get your requirements. All right, cool. So like I said, I started prepping for my exam about 6 months prior to me taking the exam. In those 6 months, I just kind of, not aggressively, but I just gingerly, nicely, politely, quietly, leisurely created some type of time schedule, a regimen for myself. So within the first week, I would say, okay, I'm going to take at least 5 hours of education courses until I reach the number of required courses that I need. So, I paced myself. Now, when it came down to, I think, 3 months prior to the exam, I then bought myself the PMBOK book. I actually didn't have it all that time. This book is huge, right? At that time, they were transitioning from the old style of exam to a new style, so I had to buy the 6th edition, which is fine. When I did that, I set up a schedule for myself as well. So I said, you know what, prior to me taking the bootcamp class, why don't I set up a schedule to break down all the chapters that I have to read and read each of these chapters within this set period of time. So let's say, for instance, in this book, it's a lot of text, to be honest. It's about 6 chapters. Okay, so it's about 6 chapters, and within each chapter, there are like a bunch of subsections. So I literally took a calendar and I said, you know what, I'm gonna pace myself. So chapter 1 will take me, let's say, 2 weeks to read, or maybe a week and a half. And then I just basically sectioned it off. So I'd say, all right, so for this week, I'm gonna read section 1.1 through 1.5. Next week I'll read, next week I'll read 1.6 through 1.12. And I pretty much paced myself, but I was disciplined, you know what I mean? So I made sure that I stuck with the regimen. And then, and to be honest, while I read it, I wasn't really retaining any of the information because it's not an easy read, It's very dense with information, it's very technical. So my goal for myself was not necessarily to read for understanding, it was more so to read for exposure. I wanted to, I know how I learn and how I study, so I know that for me, it's ideal that I at least start to expose myself to something. And then once I've exposed myself to that something, I then go a second round and start to intensely or more closely look at that information. All right, so that was pretty much my process. About 3 months prior to my exam, at this point I had already actually completed my application and submitted it in. I started now pacing myself, and all I was doing was just reading for exposure. It wasn't quick reading, but I wasn't sitting here really trying to make sure, like, okay, do I really understand this stuff? I didn't do that. Once I completed that, about a month prior to me taking the exam itself, I took my bootcamp class. So at this time, with the bootcamp class is now where I was going to really start to to do some intense studying and reading, reading to understand. So once I got into that bootcamp class, it actually started, I think, with an exam. So it was actually pretty intense. So we started with having an exam, and the exam would show you exactly where you're at. Like where's your standing point in terms of this exam. And then midday, before we'd go to lunch, we'd have another exam, and then end of day, we'd have another exam. So we'd have 3 exams each day during that 4-day period of that boot camp. And then by the end of that whole process, we would then have one finalized exam last day, and that would pretty much give you a sense of where you stood. So I believe, from my understanding, if you got like a 70% or 80 or higher, you were probably good to go in terms of taking the exam. And if you got something lower, depending on where that was, they recommended that you don't take the exam immediately. You take a little bit more time to study rigorously, but you don't allow more than a month to go past before you take the exam. Does that make sense? You don't allow more than a month to pass by without having taken the exam. Okay, woo! So this video is about 10 minutes long, which is kind of long, but that was pretty much my process. I started 6 months before. The 6 months I was really just pacing myself in terms of making sure I met the requirements. I pretty much at that point had my 3 years of project management experience already, so I met the minimal criteria. It was now just making sure that I met the educational criteria. 3 months in, so 3 months right before taking the exam, I started to now actually look at the PMBOK, this heavy thing, and I started to pace myself in just reading each chapter and section. So, in this case, I wasn't reading to understand, I was reading for exposure. And then about a month into, prior to taking the exam, I then took a boot camp. Within the boot camp, it was now reading for understanding and then intense testing. So it was more so strategy, understanding how to take the test. And I just immersed myself. During that whole period, I was still working. I was working full time, but I think my employer was also a little bit understanding to an extent because prior to me taking the exam, I was able to take like a little bit of a week off. So I didn't have the pressures of work during that week, but along the way during that 6-month period, I continued to work full time. All right, guys, so that's my story, PMP certified. Do I think it's worth it? I don't know, yes and no. I will say though, it's very respected and highly regarded. So if you do have it, I do think it makes a difference. That's my take. All right, bye. If you have any questions, feel free to message me. You can reach me at chanz@Chanda-Louise.com or create a narrative on IG. All right, bye.